Hey everyone, this is Ludwig. I have an incredible story that I'm sure you'll love. This story is about a famous Hollywood actor who taught an important lesson at one of LA's most luxurious restaurants. It's a story about how a simple moment turned into a lesson on respect that not only changed one woman's life but also changed how people think about luxury, kindness, and the real meaning of class. Let me tell you what happened when Clint Eastwood, the legendary actor and director, walked into one of the most high-end restaurants in Los Angeles wearing a simple polo shirt and slacks. On that day, nobody recognized Clint. He had a reservation at the restaurant, but nobody knew he was the owner. He had secretly purchased the Grand Oak restaurant a few months before this event, and he wanted to see how the staff would treat ordinary people, not just celebrities. The moment that took place at that restaurant became one of the most famous stories in Hollywood. This all happened on a normal Friday evening at the Grand Oak. It was a fancy restaurant in LA that had recently been renovated, and it was filled with all kinds of rich, successful, and famous people. The restaurant was buzzing with the laughter of business moguls, influencers showing off their fancy food on social media, and old families enjoying their regular meals. Among all these important people, there was one man sitting quietly at his usual table, sipping his whiskey. He was dressed in a simple gray polo shirt and slacks. That man was Clint Eastwood. Most of the veteran staff at the Grand Oak recognized Clint immediately. How could they not? He had been coming to this restaurant for years, even before he bought it. But the newest waitress at the restaurant, named Sophie, didn't know who he was. She was just starting her job, and she was fresh out of a prestigious hospitality school. She was eager to impress the important, high-status customers. She was busy with the young influencers who were taking pictures of their gold leaf desserts, and the important business people who were dressed in suits. She didn't have time for an old man in a polo shirt who didn't look like someone who could afford the fancy menu. Little did she know she was about to make one of the biggest mistakes of her career. Clint had purchased the Grand Oak 6 months ago, but he had given the staff strict instructions. Treat him just like any other customer. He didn't want them to treat him differently because of who he was. He wanted to see if the staff treated everyone the same, not just celebrities or famous customers. To Clint, the real test of the quality of a restaurant wasn't how they treated rich or famous people, but how they treated ordinary guests. When Clint sat down that Friday, he had no idea that Sophie was going to make a huge mistake. Sophie had been working at the restaurant for only a short time, and she hadn't yet learned the true meaning of hospitality. Instead of treating Clint like a regular customer, she started to judge him based on his clothes. She didn't know that Clint Eastwood, the man in the simple polo shirt, had just quietly bought the restaurant to make sure it stayed true to its roots. Roots that involved treating everyone with respect, no matter how they were dressed or how much money they had. Sophie's first mistake came when she walked up to Clint's table, acting like she was doing him a favor. She looked at him sitting there with his drink and said, "Sir, I couldn't help but notice you've been nursing that whiskey for quite a while. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable at the bar? We're expecting several reserved parties at this table." Clint, as always, kept his calm. He looked at her and simply replied, "It's a good whiskey." He didn't want to cause trouble. He didn't want to make a scene. But Sophie wasn't having it. She continued with her fake concern and said, "You know, our restaurant is a bit more upscale than a bar. Maybe you'd feel more comfortable there." Clint looked up at her. He wasn't angry, but there was something about the way he looked at her that made Sophie pause. It was the kind of calm that only comes from someone who has seen a lot in life and isn't easily upset. But Sophie didn't seem to notice. She was more concerned about her image and her desire to make the restaurant exclusive for people like her. Clint didn't budge. He said simply, "I'm comfortable here." Sophie, though, wasn't happy with his response. She glanced at the other tables, the young people in their fancy clothes, taking photos of their expensive desserts. She glanced at the older couple at the next table, and she noticed them whispering, probably wondering why Clint wasn't leaving. Sophie pushed further, clearly annoyed. "Sir," she said, now a little sharper, "our executive chef prepares an exclusive menu, and the prices reflect the caliber of our establishment." Clint didn't react to her comment. Instead, he continued to sip his whiskey, his gaze steady. Sophie wasn't going to back down, though. She wasn't paying attention to his calm demeanor. She was more concerned with making a point. "I think you misunderstand," Sophie said. "This restaurant is for people who understand what modern luxury means. People like those over there." She pointed to the young influencers who were taking selfies with their gold leaf desserts. "They respect the ambience. They get it." Clint looked at her, his expression not changing, but his eyes narrowed slightly as if testing her words. "Modern luxury," he repeated. "What exactly does that mean to you?" Sophie was caught off guard by the question. She had been talking for so long, thinking she had control of the situation, but Clint's calm, steady gaze made her falter. She quickly recovered, though, and said, "It means that some places are not for everyone. Not everyone can understand what it takes to appreciate a place like this. Our clientele appreciates modern luxury." As Sophie spoke, her words were full of arrogance. She was so convinced that people like Clint, who were dressed simply, couldn't belong in a place like the Grand Oak. She looked at him with disdain, thinking he didn't understand the true meaning of luxury. But Clint wasn't fazed. Instead, he smiled, that familiar half-smile that people had seen on screen for decades. It was the kind of smile that said he was in control of the situation, and he wasn't going to be bothered by the arrogance of someone who didn't know who he was. "I see," Clint said, taking a sip of his drink. "You think I don't belong here? That's interesting." The tension in the room was building. Other guests were starting to watch the exchange. The older couple at the next table looked nervous, but they also recognized that something important was happening. Michael, the manager, who had been watching the conversation from across the room, was now rushing over to try to stop what was happening. But Sophie wasn't backing down. She was so caught up in trying to prove her point, she didn't realize how bad the situation was getting. "This restaurant is for people who know how to behave," she said, now raising her voice. "It's not for people who just wander in and sit wherever they want." Clint set his whiskey down on the table slowly. The small movement was enough to make everyone in the room fall silent. Michael was now just steps away from them, but it was too late. Clint looked at Sophie and spoke softly, but his voice was strong and firm. "You're right about one thing," Clint said, his eyes focused on hers. "In my day, people didn't just walk into places like this and sit wherever they wanted. But they were treated with respect. And respect doesn't depend on how much money you have or what you wear. It's about how you treat other people." Sophie's eyes widened as she realized what was happening. She had been rude and dismissive to someone who had earned the respect of millions of people. But Clint didn't just stop there. He was teaching her a lesson she would never forget. Clint paused for a moment and then reached into his pocket. He pulled out his phone and made a call. "Mark, could you bring me the ownership papers?" he asked. "And the renovation plans we discussed last week?" He hung up the phone and then looked back at Sophie. "Sophie," he said, "I've been coming here every Friday for the past 6 months. I sit at this table, order the same drink, and enjoy the quiet. Want to know why?" He didn't wait for her to respond. "Because 6 months ago I bought this restaurant. I bought it not because I wanted a place to show off, but because the Grand Oak was a place where people were treated with dignity and respect. This place used to stand for something real." The entire restaurant was silent. It was as if everyone was holding their breath. Sophie stood there, frozen. The weight of Clint's words was sinking in. She had just insulted the owner of the restaurant, and she had no idea who he was until that moment. She realized that she had not just insulted a customer, but someone who had worked hard for years to build a legacy based on respect and kindness. Clint continued, his voice calm but powerful. "This restaurant doesn't stand for luxury or social media status. It stands for treating everyone with respect, no matter who they are or what they wear. And that's something I plan to keep." Sophie stood there, her face pale, her heart pounding in her chest. She had no idea what to say. She had misjudged Clint, and now she realized just how badly she had messed up. Clint smiled at her, but this time it was a different smile. It wasn't a smile of amusement, but one of understanding. "I could fire you right now," Clint said. "But that's not what this place is about. Instead, I'm going to give you a choice." Sophie looked at him, unsure of what he meant. "You can leave. You can walk out of here and find a job at a place that cares more about how people look than how they treat each other. Or," he paused, "you can stay and you can learn from Carlos here." Carlos, the busboy who had tried to warn Sophie earlier, stepped forward. Clint turned to him. "Carlos tried to help you. He understood the real meaning of respect. He's the kind of person who understands hospitality." Carlos's face was filled with disbelief. He had never expected to be a part of something like this. Clint looked at him and said, "How would you like to start training to be a waiter here at the Grand Oak? We could use more people like you, people who understand the real meaning of hospitality." Carlos's eyes widened with excitement and gratitude. "Yes, sir," he said. Clint turned back to Sophie. "So what will it be? You can leave or you can stay and learn from Carlos, who knows what this place is really about." Sophie wiped her eyes and looked around. The faces of the veteran staff were all looking at her, waiting to see what she would choose. She thought for a moment, then spoke softly. "I'll stay. I'll learn." Clint nodded. "Good choice." The tension in the restaurant began to melt away. The older couple at the next table started to clap. Others joined in. They weren't clapping because Clint was famous. They were clapping because they had just witnessed a lesson in dignity, respect, and the real meaning of hospitality. And so, the Grand Oak remained one of LA's top restaurants, not because of its luxury but because of its heart. If you ever visit the restaurant on a Friday evening, you might still see Clint Eastwood sitting in his usual spot, quietly ensuring that the spirit of respect and kindness lives on. If you enjoyed this story, share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you think. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories filled with adventure, mystery, and excitement. Your support means the world and it helps keep these stories coming. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.